I think sometimes it's the darkness. The darkness that's everywhere, and there's nothing darker than the first few minutes after you die. That's definitely the darkest. But then there was a long time that I was waiting for that darkness. But there's light if you look for it. I'm getting ahead of myself. I got a story to tell you, and that's why I'm here today, to tell you this story. Because when we look for it, we can find light in the darkness. My name's Simeon. That's better. I can see a little. My name's Simeon. You may have heard of me. You may have not heard of me. Some of you know who I am. Some of you don't. Luke wrote about me in his gospel. In fact, I like what Luke said about me. It was really, let me share it with you. Luke says, "Behold, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was just and devout." I like that. Other translations that you have today say he was good and righteous. A good and righteous man. I like when people say nice things about me. This man was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. The breath of heaven was right there on him. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. A good and righteous man. I will say that Luke writes this all after the fact. And sometimes after the fact, we like to make things seem a little nicer than they are. And so maybe there's a little bit of that in there. And actually, when I think about it a little bit, I'm not so sure I want to be lumped in with all the good and righteous people in my history. I was thinking about that. Moses was good and righteous. Yeah, he was a murderer. David, he was a good one, right? He's good and righteous, man after God's own heart. Yeah, he was an adulterer and a murderer. His grandma, Rahab, she was a harlot. Ezekiel, the prophets. Ezekiel, he was crazy as a loon. I don't know if after all being lumped in with all those people was such a good thing. And really, I'm not that special. I'm just a man with a story to tell. And in fact, my story is really not that important except for one fact. It's part of his story. And because it's part of his story, my story is important. But I'm just a man who heard a voice and was waiting for the Messiah to come. I still remember the day I heard the voice. It was a long time ago. I was very, very young at the time. We were gathered at my great-grandfather's. It was on the Sabbath. Sabbath was always a wonderful thing, gathering around, and the old people would tell the stories of our history. And we were gathered around there, and it was the night I heard the voice. I could still remember when that voice came. And you have to understand, for this story to make any sense at all as we tell it, that I was a carpenter. I was a builder, and one night this voice came to me and said, "Simeon, if you build it, he will come." Oh, no, wait, that was a movie I was watching the other day. That wasn't what happened. We were gathered around at my great-grandfather's, and we were talking, and they like to talk about the old things. They talk about the prophets and the coming of Messiah and the things that were predicted. And this particular night, my great-grandfather wanted to talk about the great war of religious freedom. You see, you people would refer to the year of the War of Religious Freedom as 167 BC, before Christ. We had no clue that we were counting down towards the Messiah. We didn't know when the Messiah would come. I hadn't even been spoken to yet by the voice. So we weren't counting down. We didn't have numbers. We simply referred to years in those days like things like in the year that King Uzziah died, as Isaiah the prophet said, or in this case, my grandfather said, in the war of the great year of the great religious freedom. You see, these people, these strangers, these foreigners had all come into our land. And I think it's important that you understand some of the backstory at the time. Just a few years before, our prophets had been loud and vocal for years about Messiah coming, and then all of a sudden the voices went quiet. In fact, they went quiet for longer than your country has been in existence. Almost 400 years of silence, and our people were waiting and waiting. And during that time, a man named Alexander came to power. And he conquered basically the whole known world at that point in time. And then when he died very young, he divided his kingdom up among 3 different people. And there were different rulers in each part of it. You check your history books for all this. There were people like the Ptolemies that were there. And in our area, a group called the Seleucids came and ruled. And they were Greek and they were Hellenistic. And they were foreigners and they were outsiders, and they came in and they brought in their worship and their gods, and they defiled our temples and our sanctuaries. And sometimes people just come from outside and bring their ways that are strange and different, but they're not the holy ways and not God's ways. And finally, my great-grandfather and his generation reached a point where they said, enough. We need to go back to God. We need to make Israel great again. And so they undertook the Great War for religious freedom in what you would call 167. There was a man named Judah Maccabees. He led the war. Some thought he was the Messiah, but he wasn't. He was killed in this war. This war went on for years, almost 6 years. And it wasn't your normal type of war because the people knew we could not fight a war head on with the armies that were against us. And so this became a different kind of war. It became what you would refer to as a guerrilla war. Attack, counterattack, feint, diversions. And it went on. And then an incredible thing happened. We won our freedom. And Israel became a nation again and would be for the next 100 years or so. And we were there and gathered around, my great-grandfather said, and decided that the one thing we have to do is return to worship of the one true God. And so they went back to the temple that had been desecrated by these people. And they went into the place that is the Holy of Holies, the place where only the priest could go once a year. And as they got in there, they saw all that had been defiled in there. And yet they came in and they knew so much had been taken out of that. The Ark of the Covenant used to be there. And all that remained was a single menorah. It was there. And it's not like the one we have in front of us today that has 9 candles. It was a menorah of 7 candles. It had been commissioned by Moses. It had traveled with the ark. It had been in the Holy of Holies, used only once a year when the high priest would go in. And as they purified this area, they came and they looked, and there was one vial of oil that had not been desecrated. And so they lit the one vial and prayed. And miracle of miracles, wonder of wonders, that oil burned for 8 days. In fact, it's one of 2 miracles that happen within the Holy of Holies that are very, very important to this story. And it burned for 8 days, and it's why we have the menorah that we have now. The 8 days, the 8 candles, and then the candle representing God Almighty. All 9. What a miracle. And my great-grandfather told us these stories and about how we'd come to our freedom. And it was that night that I heard the voice for the first time. I was laying in bed, and I heard a voice go, "Simeon, Simeon." So I sat up and said, "Yeah." "Simeon, I got something to tell you." "Okay, what is it?" "Simeon, you will not die until you see the Messiah." You want to say that again? "Simeon, I am telling you today that you will not taste death until the day you see Messiah." Well, me and the voice were having this nice conversation, so I asked him, I said, "Hey, do you have any idea what the timeline on that might be? Because I'd kind of like to know how long I'm going to be alive." And the voice laughed, "Simeon, oh, Simeon, you let God worry about that. You let me worry. In my time, in my way, you will see the consolation of Israel and the fulfillment of everything your life could ever dream of. Simeon, you just wait on me." And so that's what I did. I didn't tell anybody about it right away, but when I got up the next morning, I went and told my family all about it, and they just looked at me and called me a few names, which I can't repeat here because apparently you people are holy and you don't want to hear that kind of language. And so I won't do that. And they called me all these strange names and told me I was crazy. And after a while, I just decided I'm not going to say another word about this. And so I kept it to myself, and I kept it for years and years. But I really did start to believe that maybe, just maybe, the voice was right, and maybe I was going to see Messiah. So I waited for the Messiah to come. I can remember the day I first fell in love with her. What an incredible day. It was actually the first day I met her. It also happened to be the day of our wedding when I met her. See, today in your world where you people live, you do things weird when it comes to marriage and stuff. You have all this feelings and love, and we got to take cute pictures as a couple, and our Instabook and our Facegrams and our knock-knocks, and all that's a joke, you know, that stuff, or whatever it's called. And it's got to look good, and we got to look cute, and that's what being a couple's all about. And so we do this, and now we're ready to get married, and then you get married, and reality sets in, and the hard stuff comes. You see, in my day, in the old days, we did it right. We did everything better in the old days. Don't you know that's the truth? And we did, when it came to marriage, we did it right. Because you know what we did? We took care of the business part first. And you take care of the business and everything else will go fine. I can remember I was kind of getting old, though. And all my life, I'd wanted to get married, and I never could. The main reason that I couldn't get married, though, was because you had to pay a betrothal fee to get married. And a good bride would cost you 2 or 3 donkeys. And I could not afford 2 or 3 donkeys, so I could not get married. And I was a carpenter. I was poor. I couldn't come up with the money for that, and I couldn't figure out what I was going to do. Well, one day, I was working on a job, and I met this man. His name was Eli. And Eli and I got to talking a little bit, and he was telling me, and he was really worried because he had a daughter. And she was turning into an old maid. She was almost 20 and wasn't married yet. And Eli is like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And an idea hit me. I said, Eli, now you know I'm poor. I can't afford any donkeys, so I can't help you out there, but I got an idea. Don't you have some families right over here in this town in the House of Bread that are trying to build and start a business and have this new place, this couple that they've just moved into it? I said, how about this? What if I go over and work for them for a month and help them build this new place and give an extra room on there where they can lodge people as they come through town and do all this, and then you give me Rachel's hand? Eli thought about it. He said, I'll make you a better deal. I said, okay. He said, you do that 1 month, and then as long as you're married to my Rachel, once a year, you'll go over there for a week and help them continue to build and add on. You do that, you can marry my Rachel. What a deal. No donkeys involved, just a little bit of labor and work. It was a wonderful thing. We agreed. And I went and I put in my month. I did my work, came back. We planned a wedding. And on the wedding day, I met her for the first time. And I knew right away that she was a really smart and wise woman. She came and we were talking, and she said, Simeon, I am so glad to meet you. You are a man of such great character for all that you've done for my family. And I thought, now, this is a woman who knows what she's talking about. This is a woman I can love. And we got married. But then a funny thing happened. As we did life together, I fell in love with her. We actually liked each other. I actually could talk to her and trust her and tell her the stories my great-grandfather used to tell, and she would tell the stories of her family. And one day, I got up the courage and I said, Rachel, I need to tell you something. And she said, oh, what's that? I said, Rachel, I heard a voice once. And she said, okay, what did the voice say? I said, the voice said, I would not die until I saw Messiah. She said, "Do you believe the voice?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Okay, that's good. I got a question for you, Simeon." I said, "Sure, what is it?" She said, "Do you have any idea what the timeline is on that? Because I'd like to know how long we're going to be married, before Messiah comes." And I laughed and I said, "Same question I asked. I have no idea." Voice didn't answer. She said, "That's okay. Because God in his timing will reveal what God wishes to reveal when God wishes to reveal it. And so, Simeon, we will wait on God." Life went on. It was good. She blessed me in so many ways. She blessed me with children, 2 of them. 2 of them, the first one a girl. We named her Joelle, which means Jehovah is the Lord. And she was an incredible child, and she loved to hear my stories and would always come and would absorb them and bring them in. And the second one, a couple years later, David bar Simeon. David, son of Simeon, and like his ancient namesake, that great king, warrior king of Israel, he was a poet and a musician, and they blessed my heart and they blessed my soul, and our house would be filled every week with stories and music and joy and laughter. I can remember on Sabbath as we would talk about the coming of Messiah, and we would sit there and we would sing the words, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel." And the words, "O come thou dayspring from on high, and order all things far and nigh." It was an incredible time of love and of joy and of family. And we grew up together and we waited together. And one day I decided I'm even going to tell my children about this voice I had heard. And you know what? They believed me too. They didn't think I was crazy. They thought God would do what God says God would do. And so together, we waited for Messiah to come. But it wasn't Messiah that came. It was Pompeii and war. You call the year 63 in the countdown. We were in Jerusalem and life seemed good after 100 years, but we heard that he was coming. He had come from Rome, and now he was conquering kingdoms and states all around us, and he set his sights on Jerusalem. And he was coming, and it was relentless. So we began to prepare for the war. We were called into the city, and all of us who had skills of building and doing things were called in to help with the defense of the city. And as a builder, I was involved in fortifying the walls and making them stronger. And we went out and we built trenches around Jerusalem to slow them down so that they wouldn't come. And still they came and they laid siege to the city for 3 months. Myself and some others, we were involved in these clandestine missions, and we would go out and we would go at night and we would commit acts of sabotage and do things to slow them down, but they were still coming, and they laid siege just outside the trenches. And our archers would go up on the walls of Jerusalem, and they would fire at them to keep them from advancing any further. And they just brought in longer artillery from Rome, and they would fire at our archers, and they would have to hunker down. And when they were hunkered down, they would inch by inch, foot by foot, fill in the trenches that we had built and advanced on the city. And the truth was, there was within the city families and people who were sympathetic to Rome. The enemies that we have in our lives are not always outside. Sometimes they are inside the walls. And there were people there also. I remember the night Jerusalem fell. I was not there. I was out on a secret mission. They were advancing. And then the family of Hyrcanus, of all people, just decided what they would do was open a door to one of the city gates and let the Romans in. It's in your history books. Go look it up. It happened. They let the Romans in, and they flooded into the streets of Jerusalem, and they killed indiscriminately men, women, children. 12,000 people that day fell to the swords of Rome. I heard that my wife and son both died with swords in their hands. I have no idea whatever happened to my daughter. And Jerusalem fell, and Pompey marched through the streets, and he came to the temple. And Pompey, they're there, and they're desecrating, and they're looting, and they're taking, and they're murdering. And he decides he's going to go into the Holy of Holies and take whatever's in there and bring it out. And he marches into the Holy of Holies, and no one knows what happened. It's the second miracle within that room. You can read about it and no one can tell you what happened in there because he never spoke about it. But a few minutes later, Pompey came out and he said, "Seal this place. No one goes in here. Stop the killing. Go find any religious leaders and priests who are still alive and bring them to me." And so the ones who were still alive came and stood before this man who had just conquered this city. And he looked at him and he said, "You must never stop worshiping God in this place. You must worship God. The only thing you must do beyond that is pay your taxes to Rome." And Pompey packed every one of his soldiers up, left the city, and went back to Rome. But Messiah hadn't come. There was no Messiah. Where was he at when all of this was going on? No Messiah had come to save our city. No Messiah had come to save our temple. No Messiah had come to save my family. And all I wanted to do was die. And I couldn't because God told me I couldn't until the Messiah came. And so I had to go on with life, and I didn't want to. Everything I wanted was gone. But I had no choice. And so I waited. And I waited. Where is God in all of this? Where is God when the pain comes in? Where is God when death comes in? Where is God when we lose family? Where is God when his city and his temple are destroyed? What kind of God is this that allows this pain, that allows this suffering, that allows all this to go on? What kind of God is this who promises a Messiah and does not send a deliverer? What kind of God is this? I had no answers. I had nowhere to go. I didn't know what to do with my life. I could not go back to the house of bread because Rachel's family was there and I couldn't bear being with them. I could not stay in Jerusalem. I tried Bethany for a while, and that wasn't the place either. And then I heard about this place. So many had left Judea and headed north, and there's this place up there called Galilee. And there were cities up there. And now that the Romans had come and destroyed, and now this was a state, there was rebuilding going on. And there was work, and there was jobs, and I thought, I'll go to Galilee. That's what I've got to do. And maybe I can find a new life until Messiah comes and finds me. And so I went to Galilee. And I got up there, and as a craftsman, as a carpenter in a place that's building, it wasn't hard to find work, and I found a lot of work quickly. And then I met a family who'd been displaced from Judea who was living there, and we got to talking, and they said, "Simeon, where are you staying?" And I said, "Well, I've been sleeping over there on that street corner and this street corner, and it's kind of hard with my old bones." And they said, "Hey, we've got a place. Come, join us, stay with us." And they had a young boy. They had a son. And the son had a friend, and they used to hang out together all the time, Joe and Zeke, and they used to do stuff together. And the guy said to me, he said, "I tell you what, Simeon, why don't you come here? Why don't you come here and become a mentor, apprenticeship for these guys? Teach these young boys how to be carpenters, how to have a life and how to do these things. In exchange for that, you can live with us." And I thought, hey, that's a pretty good deal. That's a pretty good deal. Sure, I'll do this. And I started to work with these young boys, and I teaching them the tools of the trade. And they got good. I mean, they got really, really good at it. And they got older, and they grew up, and they started to do things well. And I was like, okay. And then we started to go out on missions everywhere. And they would go out, and they would have a job, and I would hang along with them, but I was just holding them back. And as we spend time together, we do a lot of talking together, and they got well into their teen years. And I'll be honest, they talked a lot. The only thing these two boys ever wanted to do was get married. That was the thing that was in their mind. They want to get married. They want to get married, be in a place to do it. Maybe gab a donkey or two, get a wife, be happy. And Zeke had a little more plans. Zeke also said, I someday kind of would like to be a priest. I actually have some Levite blood in my background. Maybe I'll be a priest. Joe's like, I just want to be a carpenter. And then we were talking one day, and they said, well, tell us about and I told my story, and we went on, and they said, we want to be like you. We want to have that kind of love, we just don't want to be as old as you were. Gee, thanks, guys. That's wonderful. And things were going well. Then a new guy got put in power in the area. His name was Herod. You call him Herod the Great. We called him Herod the Merciless. But he came into power in Galilee and in that area, and I realized that, you know what, this isn't going to be good. I'm not sure I want to hang around here for this after all these years. And Scripture does say Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem. So maybe I better head back south. So I called the boys together one day and said, guys, I'm going to head back south. I'm going to make that 80-mile trip and go back down to where I was before. And I just want to pray for you. I pray that God will give you everything you want. I pray that you will be blessed. I pray that you will find the wives that you need. I pray that maybe someday I'll see you again. Have a blessed life. But I'm going back. And I made my journey back to the house of bread, to the city of David. And I waited. And I waited. And I waited. When I first got to the city, I didn't know what to do. I was getting old. It was hard to find things to do for an old man. But then I remembered that, I think that house I helped build all those years ago, I think Rachel's nephew is living there now. And so I went over and met him, and I said, hey, do you remember me? Oh, Simeon, yes, I remember you from my childhood. I said, you got a place for me? He says, no, I have no room in our inn for you. He said, but wait a minute, I think I have a place for you. Yeah, Simeon, I know where you can stay. And he found me a place to stay. And then he said to me one day, he said, Simeon, you need a job? I said, yeah, I kind of do need to work a little bit. He said, I've got a cousin who has a bakery, and he's looking for someone to work there. Would you like to work in the bakery? And I said, yeah, I need that. But never mind. I said, I need that. He said, well, why don't you go work there? And it was great. I went over to work there, and what I loved about it was I didn't have to bake the bread. I just had to sell it. And so I sat there and said, and it wasn't a bad job. It wasn't too bad of a job. I mean, you could sit there and read your Kindle, and you can play computer games, and you can watch TV, except for the fact that our Wi-Fi was really, really spotty back then. And we didn't have TVs, computers, or Kindle, so maybe it wasn't so good a job after all. But things were happening in other parts of the world that were going to affect us, and we didn't know it. Pompey had gone back to Rome, and he had lived there and been there for a while, and then he had died. And a new leader had come to power in Rome. His name was Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar comes to power, but one day some of his good friends, Cassius and Brutus, decided that it's time for him to die. And they murdered him. And they come to power, and then these other fellas come along, and they're going, wait a minute. We don't want them to be in power. So Anthony and Octavian got together and murdered Cassius and Brutus. And they took over. And then the battle began between the two of them. Now, up in Galilee, Herod's kind of watching all of this from a distance, and Herod looks and goes, I better get on the winning side of this. He said, so let me get over here. And he says, what I'll do is I'm going to side with Anthony. Yep, I'm on Anthony's side, and I'm going to be on... Ooh, wait a minute. Looks like Anthony's losing. I'm going to be on Octavian's side instead, and Herod switched sides. Kind of like some people do when they're watching a football game and don't care who wins, and whoever's in the lead, that's who I'm rooting for. And he does it. Well, Octavian wins. And Octavian becomes the first emperor of Rome with the name Caesar Augustus. And Caesar Augustus looks over and he sees Herod over there in the Holy Land, and he looks at him and he goes, Herod, you were on my side. You were pretty good. Guess what? You're not going to just be the ruler of Galilee. You're going to be the ruler of all Israel. You are going to be the king. And Herod the Merciless moved from Galilee towards Jerusalem. And when he first came, he was violent, and he was killing people, and he was getting his enemies out of the way. And then he went, wait a minute, I want to be loved. I want to be a loved leader. So I don't think killing people is the best way to be loved, so I'm going to find other ways to do things. And he came into Jerusalem, and he built himself a temple, a palace. And then he said, but I'm going to get the people to love me. I'm going to rebuild the temple. And he was hiring workmen and craftsmen and all kinds of people to help with the building of the temple because he wanted to be loved and he wanted to be there. And the good thing was, I was too old to help, and I didn't have to. And Herod came in and ruled and rampaged. And I remember thinking to myself right then, hey, God, this might be a really good time for Messiah to come. In fact, I even gave God a really good plan. I said, hey, God, listen, I'm getting really, really old. You told me I'm not going to die till Messiah comes. Here comes Herod. We've got all these Romans coming in control. So now, I tell you what, God, now's a good time. If you don't mind, let's just try it my way, because I don't like the way your way is going. It's not convenient to me. So if you could, just go ahead, send Messiah, send him right on in here. Let's take over everything and do it. And Lord, just do it today. Go ahead. And God didn't answer. Well, he didn't answer the way I wanted him to answer. He didn't come for Messiah. He didn't come at all. And I had to continue to wait. And so I waited. In fact, I waited 31 more years before I heard the voice again. They passed. I worked in the bakery every day. They all seemed the same. Get up in the morning, eat some bread, go to work, sell some bread, come home, go to bed, do it again. 31 years because I had to wait for Messiah, because I couldn't die. The days all seemed alike. There was one day, right before I heard the voice, just a few days before, where I thought I heard something. I'd gone home. It was night. I was in bed, and I thought I heard a noise that was coming from outside, maybe up in the sky somewhere, I don't know. And I thought I heard it, and I thought I heard singing, like a huge host of people just singing and singing. And so I got up, and I went to my window, but by the time I hobbled across the room and looked out the window, there was nothing there. Just voices. So I went back to bed. And a couple days later, I was in the bakery. And I was sitting there, and this fella comes in, mid-50s, looked at him. I know him. I've seen that face, but I couldn't pull it to my mind. And then he said, hey, I'd like to order some bread. I'm hungry. I need some stuff for me and my family. And I recognized the voice. Joe! Joe! It's me. It's Simeon. Joe, I can't believe it's you. Simeon, I thought you'd be dead by now. Thanks, Joe. So what's going on, Joe? What's happening with you? What are you doing here in this place? Why aren't you up in Galilee? Oh, Simeon, it's a long story. Taxes and Dad growing up here and all kinds of stuff. And, I had to come back and register for all of that. and do all these things. Well, what's happening? What's going on in your life? How's Zeke? Oh, Zeke is great. Zeke got married. Wonderful girl. You would love her. He became a priest like you wanted to. They had a son about 6 months ago. Oh, incredible young guy. Yeah, just fabulous. And me, well, Joe, did you ever get married? I did. I did it like you when I was old, and then I heard voices and angels and all kinds of stuff, and you wouldn't understand. I'm like, oh, yes, I would. It's a beautiful girl. In fact, we just had a son just a couple days ago right here, and I would love for you to be, oh, man, Joe. And then at that moment, they came in. Whole bunch of ruffians, nasty-looking, foul-smelling, foul-mouthed guys coming in. Hey, you, old man, we're hungry. We've been out chasing sheep all over the place. They got away from us a few days ago because we left them unattended, and we've been trying to gather them up, and we haven't had any. We need some bread. And so it was the job, so I started taking care of them and giving them the bread and the things that they needed, and while I did, Joe left, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him anymore. And I fed these guys, and I wondered about Joe and his story. And then a couple days later, I was in bed at night, and I heard the voice say, Simeon, tomorrow, go into Jerusalem. Go to the temple. You will see Messiah. And I said, no, I'm old. I'm tired. It hurts to walk. I am not about to walk 5 miles to go in there. You said Messiah is going to be born right here in this city. You have Messiah come to my door. And the voice just laughed, Simeon. My way, my time. You go the distance. I'll ease your pain. But you're going to Jerusalem tomorrow. And so for one last night, I waited for the Messiah. I got up early the next morning and started the walk. It takes a long time when you're old. And I walked towards the city, and I was amazed by the people coming in and out of Jerusalem everywhere. People going in to do business, people coming out from the city. And I took my time, and after a while, I finally stopped near a fig tree and sat down and rested because it wasn't easy. Although along the way, it was really interesting. I started to feel stronger as I was walking. And after that rest, I felt even stronger going into the city. But while I sat there under the tree and I watched the people, and I thought I saw Joe with his wife, and it looked like they had a child with them. And I tried, and I got up, and I was like, I'm going to catch them. And I tried to, but I couldn't catch them because the donkey she was riding was a whole lot faster than I was. And they went on into the city, and I made my way into Jerusalem for the first time in 60 years, and I walked through the streets of that town. I walked past the places where we'd lived, where my children had enjoyed life. I walked past the place where they say my wife died, and I stood there and cried. And then I walked on, and I walked into the temple, and there were men and women doing business there everywhere, and there were people selling lambs and selling doves, and there were money changers cheating people, and I just wanted to go over and throw those tables over and holler at them all. But I was old. That's something a younger man would have to do. And as I watched all this, I looked and I saw Joe, and he was buying doves, and then it hit me. He just had a child. This must be day 8. Because on the 8th day is the day of the purification rites for the child and for the mother. And you would come into the temple, and you had to offer a sacrifice on that day. And he had come in to offer the sacrifice for his wife and for this child especially. And he was there, and you bought the sacrifice. You would buy a lamb to sacrifice unless you were really, really poor. And Joe was a carpenter, so I knew he was poor. And he was buying 2 doves. And he bought them, and he went into the temple and did the sacrifice. And I saw him when he came back out. And when he came out, his eyes caught mine. And I'm like, hey, Joe. And he came over, and he's like, Simeon, I'm so glad to see you again. I want you to meet my wife. This is Mary. But I didn't even see her because there was a child. There was a child there. And the voice said to me, Simeon, this is my Messiah. Luke tells the story oh so well. Luke says this. So he came by the Spirit, he being me, into the temple. And when Joe and Mary brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he, Simeon, took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, you see, I reached for the child. And Mary was a little reticent. Joe just put his hand on her shoulder, and I took this child. And I heard the voice, and these words came out of my mouth. Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples, a light to bring revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people, Israel. In that moment, I held the Messiah in my hand. And all of my life came flooding back to me. Every moment, every time I had waited, every piece of agony, pain, and joy throughout it all came back to me. And in my arms was the Messiah here in God's temple. And Joseph and Mary just looked at me. Luke says they marveled at me. And it all welled up, and I looked into Mary's eyes for the first time, and then the agony just hit me because I knew what she was about to go through as the mother of this child. And I said to her, behold, this child is destined for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign which will be spoken against. And Mary, a sword will pierce your own soul, and the thoughts of many hearts are going to be revealed. I died after that. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter where, doesn't matter how. God fulfilled his promise. And my time had come. God fulfilled his promise, and in my arms I held the glory and the humanity and the divinity of God. And I saw who God really is. But after that I died. You know, I lived my whole life unable to die because I had to wait on this child. But because the child lived, I was able to die, but even more so, because the child lives, I live.